Welcome back, everybody, to another episode of Han Talks First. I'm your host, Han, and this is the podcast you're looking for. A Star Wars podcast where we talk about everything that is the latest and greatest in the world of Star Wars and that this galaxy has to offer. As I mentioned last week, I have a special guest today. Before I get into the interview segment of the show, I want to thank everybody for tuning in and joining us today. Happy Monday. I hope you're off to a great start of your week, and I hope you're staying safe out there. With that being said, I'll let all of you know that this interview was done on a phone call, so there was no contact between me and my guest. We were definitely being safe and social distancing ourselves. Very, very much so. So, thank you so much again for tuning in. Please make sure you go check out all the other episodes of Han Talks First. We drop them every week here, and make sure you use the force to like, subscribe, and if you don't mind, please leave a rating or a review on Apple Podcasts. It helps out so much. Thank you. And also, the YouTube is officially up. We're dropping some videos there every week, a bunch of segments to the shows, some of the important topics that we've discussed here on the show. Without any further ado, I'm going to play the interview that was done with me and Brian Kesinger. I do apologize for any background noise that you may hear during this interview. They were doing construction in our area while this was taking place. I did my best to cancel it out, but there are still some parts where you can hear the construction in the background. We'll just say that we did this interview from the droid factory today. Thank you and enjoy.
First, you talk first, I talk first.
I'm joined today by a very special guest, Brian Kesinger, a story artist, illustrator, and author. He's had a 20-plus year career at Disney that has spanned both hand-drawn and CG animated films, from Tarzan to Frozen 2, and many more, which I'm sure we're going to talk about later. His style and artistic journey has also led him to find an additional home with Marvel Comics and Lucasfilm. So I am very thrilled, very honored to have the chance to sit down with him here and chat on the show on Han Talks First today. Brian, welcome to the show. How you doing?
Very good. Thanks so much for having me.
Oh, no, thank you. I'm really excited. I know the listeners will love to get the chance to hear your story and learn about what you do. And I'm sure, I think I've mentioned some of your work before on the podcast. So for those of you listening that have heard me mention it, well, now you get the chance to hear him talk about his process and how he got into his art background and everything like that. So Brian, with every time I have a guest on my show, I always start by asking them what their Star Wars story is. Now, this can be a favorite memory you have, or the first time you got into Star Wars, or how you developed your love for Star Wars. For me, for example, the reason I'm so drawn to this franchise is just because of the moral lessons, the life lessons, and just about being an individual in this big world and learning how you not only stand out as an individual, but are also a big part of a bigger world. So what's your Star Wars story? I'd love to hear.
Yeah, that's great, man. Mine would have to be, and I've got several, but I think the first one would be seeing Return of the Jedi in theaters. I was actually born in 1978, so I was born a year late for the first movie coming out. But I am born on May 4th, so the fact that I'm born on Star Wars Day, I think kind of balances it out a little bit.
No way. That is so cool.
Yes. But I remember very vividly going to see Return of the Jedi in the theater. That was 1983, I believe. And back then, the movie theaters, basically you open the door and it was a straight shot to the screen. Nowadays movie theaters usually walk in the double doors and you walk around the stadium seating. But we were actually late to the movie.
Oh no.
And so I was like, okay. And the theater doors opened up. We walked into the theater, and the first thing I saw on the screen was the door to the Rancor opening up, and the Rancor coming out. And for little old me, who was probably at that time doing quick math, 5 years old, I thought that the screen was opening up and that monster was actually going to come out into the theater.
Oh my gosh, that's so cool and scary.
yeah, it was exactly that. Scary and cool. And I was hooked ever since. The rest of the movie, in fact, that's how I got to kind of know the movie. So I remember the next time going to see it, and there was all this stuff at the beginning. I was like, oh, this all makes sense now. Because I was just along for the ride, hadn't seen any of the other movies. I just kind of jumped into it to Return of the Jedi. So for that, to this date, Return of the Jedi, I think is like my favorite. I should say my emotional favorite. I think my favorite overall would probably be the first one, New Hope. But I have the most connection to Return of the Jedi.
That's awesome. My favorite is also A New Hope. But as far as emotional connection, a lot of people have said that their favorite's Return of the Jedi, which is great, but also kind of shocking since most of the hype is surrounded around The Empire Strikes Back. But it sounds like most people have that, quote, emotional attachment to that third movie.
I think what the third movie offers you is a chance to see all the characters together again. And there's so many cool aliens and the speeder bike chase. I mean, obviously, Empire Strikes Back, for the storytelling and the emotion, it's way up there. But for the fun and the adventure, and again, for a 5-year-old me, seeing a bunch of Ewoks running around, I'm in.
So how did you see episode 4 and 5 before watching Return of the Jedi, or did you just start with Return of the Jedi?
I just started with Return of the Jedi.
Oh, that's so cool.
Yeah, so because again, back then there wasn't VHS, right? They weren't out, so you only got to see them if they came out in theaters. So I didn't actually see New Hope until a couple years later.
Oh, wow. Were you like really giddy and excited to learn that there was more Star Wars out there?
Yeah, definitely, because my parents were fans.
Okay.
In fact, they were pretty into it. They were really big fans. I remember once playing with some toys with my mom, and I came up to her with a couple of spaceships, and I said, "Hey, Mom, let's play TIE Fighters." And she corrected me. She said, "Well, those are TIE Interceptors. Those aren't TIE Fighters."
That sounds like a great mom.
Yeah, she's awesome. And so they were very much into it, and told me how they went to go see Empire Strikes Back in the drive-in, and how that was cool because for all the space battle scenes, you're out in the open at night. It just looked like spaceships flying around in the air, which is pretty cool.
Oh, so, that's an interesting way to view those movies as at a drive-in in the open space. That'd be really cool.
Yeah, that would be cool. I was very excited when I was finally able to see the other ones.
Yeah, I bet. That's really cool. Speaking of drive-ins, this is a little off topic, but as you all listening know, we're still in this quarantine phase, and it's funny, I was reading the other day that drive-in theaters actually have spiked up in the amount of people going to them, which is really cool because you can still keep that social distance somewhat separated from each other, but at the same time, more people are experiencing that drive-in experience.
Yeah, which I'm all for. I love the drive-ins. I remember, again, being a kid of the 80s, we went to go to the drive-in to see Ghostbusters.
Oh, cool.
And then, so Ghostbusters is on one screen. I look over the other screen, and there's Temple of Doom playing. And then I think on the third screen was Goonies. So it was a good time to be a film geek.
Yeah, no kidding.
In the 80s.
The only drive-through experience I've had, and that I remember, is I saw the first Rugrats movie at the drive-in theater.
Really?
Yeah,
That's funny.
it was really cool, especially as I don't know how old I was, but I was young and
Yeah.
just experiencing one of my favorite kids shows on the big screen. In that, you tune in on the radio to the channel,
Yeah.
and you're just with your family, and you can talk during the movie, and I don't know, it was just a lot of fun and a really cool experience.
Yeah, it's the best. That's awesome.
So everyone listening, if you get the chance, go to a drive-in movie. It's pretty awesome.
Yeah, they're great.
So we are going to talk about Star Wars. So guys, don't worry. I'm sure we're going to talk about, you know, Disney, Lucasfilm, Star Wars. We're going to talk about the Rise of Skywalker. We're going to cover it all. But
Yeah.
I want to start first with learning a bit more about you, such as your background. And
Uh-huh.
you've been meddling in this art world for quite some time. So I'm curious as to how you got started and what your influences were and how you developed your career.
Yeah, thanks. So, I've always very much been into animation. The first movie I saw in the theater was Fox and the Hound, which was a Disney animated movie. And ever since seeing that, I knew that was what I wanted to do. And so I
How
would
old were you
always,
then?
uh, probably around the same age. Because I think too that was actually at a drive-in as well.
Oh, cool.
Um, and it must have been a re-release because I don't think it actually came. Well, maybe it was. It might have been 82 or 81. So I was younger, but I was just like enthralled with it. And then, told my parents that's what I want to do when I grow up. And they kind of laughed at the charm of that because animation, and through most of the 80s and into the most of the 80s, it was kind of a not known about industry. People knew cartoons were made, but it wasn't until like Little Mermaid came out and some of those bigger movies that it really became like a worthwhile job and something that people knew about.
Yeah.
So all while growing up, I would draw a lot and learn different styles just because I'd always be like copying things onto paper on the dining room table, like I'd have Calvin and Hobbes book next to me and be drawing from that. Or I remember those great Jim Lee covers of the X-Men that he did. It was like 4 covers that joined together for one massive picture. So I would draw from that a lot. And so I just kind of grew up doing fan art before it was really a thing, right?
Yeah.
Like now, before it even had a name of being fan art, right?
Yeah.
And I think because I did that and would draw so much from other people's work, it got me to understand the different languages that people use when they draw, right?
Yeah, that's really cool.
Different styles and that sort of thing, which ended up really helping me in an animation career because in the 2D days, when you'd have about 400 to 600 artists all working on the same movie, we all had to draw exactly the same so that the movie never changed styles. Right now, that's not really an issue with CG films because they all are modeled and rendered in a way that kind of gives some automatic cohesion.
Yeah.
But back then, when you would start on a movie, you'd be given a style guide that the art director created, and you would actually practice drawing in the style of the movie.
I heard you say once in an interview that a lot of how you started was also through tracing some of your favorite works.
Yes. Oh, yeah.
And that helped inspire original ideas. Is that right?
Yeah, definitely. Well, it's funny because, and it's somewhat taboo to admit to tracing, but as a kid, I think, and as someone who's learning, I think it's invaluable because you get to spend a lot of time with the drawing, right? It actually brings you closer to the artist because you're faced with seeing all the creative solutions they did. Like, oh, how did they draw this balloon being tied off at the bottom? oh, well, they did it this way. You start to build up your own library in your head of how to draw things. And so, yeah, I would do that a lot, where I, in fact, had a Return of the Jedi coloring book that I wish I still had, because it was super cool, that I would actually trace out of rather than color.
That's a very interesting way to put it. It's almost like by tracing other works, getting the inspiration, it kind of teaches you the secrets of how it's done, and it's good practice.
Yeah, purely practice. I mean, there's people out there that trace and then try to sell it as their own.
No.
And obviously that's not what I'm advocating. But for just being alone and seeing how things are done, it's a great exercise.
Yeah. Now, I don't consider myself an artist, but I use my girlfriend's iPad. She has the Procreate app. And
Oh, yeah.
what I've been doing is taking pictures of things, most recently action figures, and then tracing the outline and trying to fill in the detail without using the photo. And
That's cool.
yeah, I most recently did a Skeksis from the Dark Crystal TV show, and
Awesome.
it's really cool because I like how you put it. It helps you bring a little bit more closeness to the artist and realize what they're doing, because I wasn't copying a piece of art. Well, drawn art. It was more of a clay model, which is still you notice more how delicate it was that they craft every line and color, and it's just an interesting way to view it.
Yeah, so true.
So would you say that Disney is one of your big influences?
Oh, big time. More so than, like, I know that there were a lot of kids my age that were maybe more into comics and comic art, and other kids were maybe more into music, that sort of thing, but or even anime, right? They're like all different camps. But for me, I was really into Disney Animation Classic, and then the stuff that started coming out in the 80s and 90s.
Yeah. So how'd you take that inspiration and develop your own career out of it, as far as like either collaborations or original works?
Yeah, so I was fortunate enough to have a teacher in high school who really, knew animation, knew the animation industry, and told us as students that if you really want to make it in the industry, you can't just be drawing cartoons. You have to be drawing from life. You have to be real artists first, and then adapt into more animated styles. So I began in high school with a pretty intense curriculum of figure drawing classes and painting, sketching from life, all that sort of thing, so that I could start to build up a portfolio that could be reviewed and submitted to studios. Because with animation hiring, it's usually portfolio driven, right? Yeah. It's not so much about the interview process, although that's a component. The thing that's going to get you the interview or not is your portfolio.
Yeah.
So, that really helped. That teacher really helped me craft what I needed so that I could actually get a job at Disney.
Very cool. And when did you start working for Disney?
I started in 1996. I was actually, I think I still have this title, the youngest person hired at Disney Animation.
Oh, so cool.
I was technically 17 when they hired me, even though they didn't know that. So once, because what happened was I was a senior in high school, and it was time to submit my portfolios to art schools, like Cal Arts and Art Center and that sort of thing. But I decided to send one to Disney as well, just to kind of get their feedback. So I knew what to work on, what to focus on in school. and Disney was the first people to get back to me.
No way.
And yeah, and they said, we'd like to hire you. And I was shocked. And there was a long pause on my end. And, the first words I could even form, the thought I had was, I need to finish Spanish class. And then there was an even longer pause on their end. And they asked how old I was. I said, I'm 17. They said, when do you turn 18? I said, in May. And they said, okay, well, you'll start in August. And that was on the movie Tarzan.
Wow.
Yeah.
Did you end the call with gracias?
Yeah, exactly. Exactly. Well, it was kind of nice because my Spanish teacher was, I was fortunate to have a lot of supportive teachers in all courses. But Spanish, she really did not like what I was doing and didn't think I'd be able to make a career out of it.
Really?
So, not that I rubbed it in her face or anything, but it was kind of nice going into class the next day, knowing that in 3 months I'll have kind of my dream job. So
that's amazing.
Made that a little easier.
Yeah, that's really cool, especially being so young and going straight into something you love. I'm curious though. So I'm a musician, and
cool.
Among many of the challenges I face as an artist is trying to separate the hobby aspect of it and the work or the commission stuff out of it. Just trying to separate those two, and along with that challenge is trying to, I guess, creatively discipline yourself, because you want to work, you want to practice every day. You want to draw every day and do what you love. And sometimes you're hired for a project that you can't be as creatively free to do what you want. And I'm curious, how do you separate, both of those things, and knowing how to discipline yourself with that?
That's a great question. And an important question. I think that's something a lot of students need to realize as they're learning and as they want to try to join these entertainment fields. Entertainment in all forms, even in music for the most part, is about collaboration, right?
Definitely.
And so, it's not so much about being a soloist as it is about being a part of the orchestra. And the music you make as an orchestra will always be grander than anything you can do as a soloist, right? Very true. So I feel like animation is the orchestra. I feel like movie making is an orchestra. And as such, no one's going to join the orchestra immediately and be the conductor, right?
Right.
And so I see a lot of students these days with, dreams of being a showrunner right off the bat, coming in as a visual development artist and just being a character designer. And those are great goals and all things that can be achieved, but not without spending some time in the field and gaining that collaborative experience. So for me, when I came in and started on Tarzan, even though I was working on this great big, Disney animated blockbuster, I was just a cleanup layout artist, which basically meant I drew all the leaves in the background, right?
Oh, okay.
It wasn't a glamorous position. I hadn't even made it into the cinematography aspect of layout. It was purely coming in and learning that skill and helping the team. And, it was taking that, being humble and accepting that role and learning from my coworkers that gave me all this extra skill and extra opportunity. Of course, there's always going to be the outlying stories of, students who get their pilot picked up right out of school and that sort of thing, which is great. But like I say, it's a longer road. And to answer your question, I think the best way to combat it is to always have projects you want to work on that are just for you, so that at the end of the day, you can come home and be the director of your own story, be the character designer, be who you want to be, but just know that it takes time to achieve those goals when you're actually in the industry.
Very true. And for any of you creators out there listening, I think another way to get into that and be more creative is to when you're working on something, whether it's drawing, whether it's music or what have you. I think if you just work on something, if you have an idea in mind, go for it and then finish it, even if it sucks.
Yes.
Sometimes you got to get those bad ideas out of the way for good ones to come.
Yeah.
And the most important thing for me as a musician is if I'm writing a song or a small piece of music, if I don't finish that, then I really didn't accomplish anything.
Right. That's great. We have a saying in animation: be as wrong as you can, as fast as you can. Right.
I love that.
So don't worry about failing. Just fail quick, and then you can move on and learn from it. You know. So we have that kind of mentality with a lot of the work that we do.
Hearing you talk about being part of the group and collaborating, and it'll help grow your own personal advancements in the field made me think of my example I gave about what Star Wars means to me. So you're the Luke Skywalker in that situation where you're the Jedi training yourself, but once you become part of the group, you can accomplish so much more. And
Right. No, it's so true. I mean, that's what makes Luke such a great character, right? Is that he really just wanted to be a part of the fight, right? He wanted to join the academy. He had no desire to be the leader of the galaxy, right?
Exactly.
He was just a farm boy who knew there was injustice going on in the world, and he wanted to do his part. And I think that's so great is you automatically root for that character. And then he's given the added reward of gaining friends, like-minded friends, but then also, being such a big, important role. So yeah, it's a great allegory for that.
Very true. So in addition to collaborating and working on individual projects, I think one thing that I've noticed of your works, most importantly, is your aesthetic and your style. And every artist has their own take on something, and again, that's another challenge: is creating your own sound or your own look. And when I think of your style, I automatically think of, which I think is your most popular of your characters or stories, and that's Otto and Victoria. I would love to know anything you could tell me about this, how it came to be, what inspired it, and just how did you come up with this idea?
Thanks. Yeah, those characters are very special to me for that reason, that they're my own. And they came to me kind of late in the game because I had been working at Disney for over 20 years at that point and really spent my career telling other people's stories. And it wasn't until a T-shirt competition came up that was asking for steampunk T-shirt designs. And I thought, oh, I like steampunk. Let me see if I can draw something. And I ended up drawing a Victorian girl walking a pet octopus, just because that seemed like, oh, that's what high society steampunk women would do. And it ended up winning and becoming a pretty viral image online, shared around a few times, and ultimately shared back to me, not knowing that I was the artist. So that was kind of cool.
Wow, so that's how that got started.
Yeah. And then I noticed that in my sketchbook, I kept having more and more kind of ideas of what to do with those characters. So, they really kind of stuck with me. It's funny to hear you talk about my style because I don't see it. I again, because I've worked so long on so many shows, I feel like I just draw what I draw. And Otto and Victoria are definitely, inspired by that Disney kind of aesthetic as far as, animation-wise and everything. But what you'll notice if you look at it again, my other big influence, especially when it comes to steampunk, is Mike Mignola, the creator of Hellboy. And his artwork is always so striking because it has so much, what would you call it? So much graphic appeal to it. These big black shapes that just kind of like describe the shadows. Really kind of cool, creepy stuff.
Yeah.
So I thought, oh, that'd be kind of cool to give this piece that kind of look, mix a little bit of beauty, right, and appeal that you would get in Disney animated films with a little bit of the darkness that you would find in Hellboy, which again felt a little steampunk, right?
Yeah.
Which is to get the beauty and grandeur of the Victorian era with the punk side of things, right? So
can you elaborate a little bit more for our listeners on what exactly steampunk is?
Yeah, sure. It's like kind of a subgenre of science fiction. And if you hear clicking, that clicking noise are my markers. I'm actually working on something as we speak.
Oh, no worries. Very cool.
But yeah, steampunk is really cool. It's an alternate history. So it's science fiction that takes place in an alternate timeline of our world that supposes that electricity was never discovered and that everything progressed and evolved with steam power. So a lot of the times it's used in kind of post-apocalyptic stories or really kind of dire type stuff, dramatic type stuff, but it hadn't really been used a lot in fun ways. So I think that's why my work kind of stood out from it, was I saw an emptiness there, and I think that's part of the reason why maybe steampunk hasn't been as globally accepted or clung to as other genres, because it can be a little scary or a little dingy. So I thought, well, why don't I try my hand at it with my take, which is a little more for general audiences and a little more humor based, right?
Yeah.
The whole idea of having an octopus for a pet is pretty humorous. So I think it was a little bit of being at the right place at the right time.
And one thing I just to talk about your style again, and when I see a piece of work and I automatically know it's from you, an example of that is just how much story that you can tell in one frame of work. That's what I've noticed a lot from your stuff, is that you always have, even if most of the time when you see a character drawing or some kind of fan art, like we talked about earlier, you just see someone who just drew a character, and it's often very good. But sometimes I notice with yours is it's for Otto and Victoria, for example. They're always in a scenario or in a scene, and it's like, and all the props and the accessories that you add to the characters really tell a story that is just in one frame. And I think that's what separates you from other similar artists that I've seen. How do you come up with such big storytelling with such limited framework?
Wow, that's very nice of you to say, and that means a lot, because that's something I do try to strive for. And it comes from basically being a story artist, being a illustrator. This idea of a picture is worth 1,000 words. That's something that should be embraced. And there's an exercise we did in storyboard training at Disney, which was, basically study New Yorker cartoons. New Yorker cartoons are always one panel comics that have a lot of story, and every detail reinforces that story. And another good example of that is the Far Side cartoon. The Far Side was a newspaper comic done in the 80s and 90s, and they were always one panel comics, but they told so much story. So I think part of that is, embracing the storytelling side of art. That, again, like you said, it's not just about having a technically proficient drawing. There's no shortage of that on the internet, right?
Right.
There's a lot of amazing artists. There's so many artists that are better than me. There's artists that I look at and I'm like, man, why can't I be like that? And I'm sure for you with musicians, it's the same way, right?
Oh, yeah.
There's always going to be someone better. It's just how do you make yourself better? And so for me, I always look at how can I infuse my work with story. And so that just comes from practice. That comes from practice and also a little bit of diligence of just knowing that everything you put in an image should be there for a reason. And if it's not helping tell the story, then it probably doesn't need to be there.
So how do you know when you've gone too far? For example, if you're doing just one piece of art for Otto and Victoria versus doing a storyboard for some movie, how do you know when you're storyboarding for the movie that you're putting too much detail or too much story into one frame when you can tell it through multiple? Does that make sense?
Yeah. The great thing about storyboarding is you always have to pitch it. And your audience that you're pitching to, which is usually the director and the other story artists, they never lie. They never hold anything back. And you'll feel it in the room when a sequence is overstaying its welcome, when it just feels too long. It's a little bit like a performance, how an actor can tell if they're engaging their audience or not. With a drawing, it's a little harder because it is just you. And again, that kind of comes with time and knowing. But I always try to stand by the saying of like, keep it simple, right?
Yes.
At the end of the day, there's already a big idea going on, which is a woman has a pet octopus, or an octopus as a pet. So that already is a big concept to ask my audience to accept. So I'm not going to try to go overboard and over design other things, because then it's just too much to take in. So like if I knew, if I was going to do a drawing like I've done in the past where Otto is a pet octopus and he has a little mistake on the rug, like all pets do. They all sometimes go to the bathroom in the house.
Oh, yes.
But because it's an octopus, he's going to ink on the carpet, right? And so that's the joke. That's the one idea I want to get across. So when I'm drawing it, I don't need to go overboard designing the carpet. I don't need to go overboard designing the chair that the octopus is hiding behind. Mm-hmm. I certainly could, but it really comes down to prioritizing what's the idea and what's the clearest way to get it across.
Very well said. In transition, moving into Star Wars, I want to talk about the differences between digital versus traditional. And you've had experience with both, and this relates to Star Wars, obviously, because after the original trilogy, which is all very practical and handmade and very, very tastefully delicate works of art in their own way, in the next generation of the prequel trilogy, it turned into this digital phase, and it was one of the first pioneers to do a lot of this new technology and stuff like that. And it can be related to your field as well, because I've seen you've done both CG work and also traditional hand drawn. And I'm curious, what's your preference? What effects do you go for one that you can't get in the other? And how do you work with both?
I think, before there was computers, we were always trying to strive to capture the essence of life as best we could, right? And there were all sorts of tricks, especially being in the layout department, which did just do backgrounds and camera work. We were always trying to emulate dimension and that sort of thing. That's why we had the multiplane camera. It's why we would, put such a reliance on perspective and solid drawing. But at the end of the day, we were filmmakers, right? We were animated filmmakers, and not to sound too pretentious about it, because I know it still is just singing frogs, but we love cinema just as much as anyone else. So we were always chasing, and that's why those movies look as rich as they do. when CG came around, it allowed us to be the full cinematographers that we wanted to be, from moving cameras to lighting to much more detailed characters. None of the artistry was lost. It was just a matter of how can we get the artistry that came so fluently to us in hand-drawn to cross over into digital. And oftentimes, the digital side of things couldn't keep up just for their own limitations.
Yeah.
But that wasn't anything inherently wrong in pursuing CG animation. It was just a matter of reality. I mean, the Baby in Tin Toy, the first Pixar short, versus the Baby in Tangled are night and day, you know.
Right.
But that doesn't mean anyone working on Tin Toy was any less artistic. So I see a lot of times online it's a us versus them, or hand-drawn's better than CG, or CG's not as artistic. That's not at all the case. It's just a matter of, and I think we're at a point now where CG can be just as beautiful, you know.
Yes.
But for me personally, I will always have a special attachment to 2D hand-drawn animation because it's what I love and it's what inspired me to get into this industry. And I will always prefer to take a blue pencil and a sketchbook and draw that way than to go into Photoshop. But Photoshop allows me to create Otto and Victoria in a way I could never do on paper. So there's strengths to all of it, and you really have to be open to it.
How did you adapt to the digital era? Do you have any examples of things you've worked on, maybe?
Yeah, well, I was very fortunate because Tarzan was my first movie, but that was also the first movie, well, one of the first, where they were really starting to embrace CG animation, CG camera work, with those big sweeping camera moves through the jungle. So
that's what came to mind, exactly.
Yeah, so I was on that team that helped, because some of the other artists didn't want to be bothered with it because they thought it was a fad and wouldn't learn it. So the fact I was young and open to kind of new ideas, not that the older people weren't, some were, but I think helped me, so that by the time Chicken Little came around, which was our first full CG animated feature, I was able to like roll right into it.
So how, with Tarzan, for example, how did you, whose proposition was it to, push that digital movement with like the digital camera and like the sweeping effects when he's swinging through the jungle? Is that like a director decision, or is that an artist?
Yeah, that was a director decision, and the decision to kind of move the art form forward, and then they kind of threw it to the team to make it happen, which is one of the really cool things, is everyone working together to it was like our version of the moon landing, right?
Right.
Someone puts forth a mandate that they want to see these really rich backgrounds, and we said to do it. What was interesting was, we were doing it on Tarzan, and I remember while we were working on Tarzan, they brought in an early screening of Princess Mononoke, the Miyazaki movie. And it was great because we watched it, and they had a few shots in there where they were doing the same thing we were. And it was kind of cool to see, like, oh, okay, the industry is embracing this, and there's change on the horizon. So that motivated us to keep working and keep making it the best version it could be.
Yeah, and to go full force.
Right. And, I guess the difference is, that we were trying to do those camera moves while maintaining a hand-painted background look. So it wasn't like the ballroom in Beauty and the Beast, where it was beautiful but very clearly computer graphics, right?
Yeah.
This was like, how can we work on that integration?
Yeah, very true. Really cool. I would love now for us to move on to Star Wars. I'm sure all of you listening are very, excited for us
Yeah.
to talk about it. One thing I want to hear from you, I already asked your Star Wars story.
Yeah.
What is it about Star Wars that you think makes it iconic?
It's good versus evil.
Oh,
It's
yes.
kind of the purest form of story out there, and the good side wins. So it's a great message, Be kind to each other, choose the right thing, and things will work out.
And
So for me, at a base level, that's what really draws me to it.
And I think that's what the Rise of Skywalker really says at the last installment of this saga is, in the end, it was about the ultimate good being the Skywalkers versus the ultimate evil being this Palpatines.
Yeah.
And it just in a very big way, these two individuals, so to speak, representing the major good versus the major evil. And so that is what you can look at the Skywalker saga, for example, and say of it. And that is very true. I ask anyone who comes on the show and talks here, always ask them what they think makes it iconic. And I always get a different answer, and I think that's another one of the main reasons why this is so popular and it hits home with so many different people.
Yes.
What did you think of The Rise of Skywalker? And how many times did you see it in theaters?
I think I saw it like 5 times in theater, which is probably the least amount, but that's not for any assessment of the movie. It just started to come out when I was a little busier. So I saw it 5 times. I loved it. I really did. I also really loved Last Jedi. I wish that Last Jedi and Rise of Skywalker. Well, I should say this. I wish the sequel trilogy, which I love for its characters, was a little more connected. I
agree.
wish that it was, because I see so many strong points in it, but I also see a couple areas where it wasn't figured out from the start. And so, to me, Rise of Skywalker almost feels like an alternate sequel to Force Awakens.
Yes, very true.
Right? Like, for me, the battle with Kylo Ren and Rey and Snoke's throne room was more satisfying than the one in the Emperor's throne room. Just with some of the way they shot it and that sort of thing, and the iconic kind of backgrounds. Like, that's a much more striking sequence. But if you would somehow be able to merge the two, you'd have a pretty amazing second installment.
Yes.
It's almost like I would have loved for the concept of the dyad between Rey and Kylo to be discovered in the second installment. Let that be your Empire Strikes Back moment at the end of the movie, that they learn that they're actually connected. And then let's see how that pans out in the third movie.
In addition to that, one thing I said after it came out was that if we'd have found out at the end of The Last Jedi that Palpatine was still around somehow, and then it just cut off, that would be a crazy ending, and it gives you time to, like, I guess, prepare yourself, and also creatively for the creators to imagine a way for it to come about too.
Right, like how cool, because I actually thought when I saw Last Jedi that it was going to cut on that great shot of Luke standing off against the Empire there.
The first on Octu?
Yeah. No, sorry, on Crate, when he shows up and he's standing off and he turns his lightsaber on. That would have been a great circle wipe to the credits shot. That would have left everyone like, oh my God, what's happening next? But can you imagine he goes out there, and not to get too much into fan fiction, but if he goes out there and he's about to face off against these guys. Kylo Ren's about to unleash all the cannons on him, and everyone stops because they get a transmission from Palpatine.
Oh my gosh.
That's where you cut the movie, and everyone for 2 years, audiences are like, how did that happen? What's going to happen? So, yeah, I think the fact that Palpatine was kind of tacked on in a way to this trilogy of movies is a little too bad, you know?
Dude, your fan ending for The Last Jedi, it's not even real, and it gave me goosebumps and made me so excited for it.
Yeah. So, but I also know, just being behind the scenes on other big movies and big franchises, that it's, you're working with a lot of people, and you're serving a lot of different needs. So it's hard. But, clearly the way the Marvel films were structured out led to a very satisfying last movie.
Very true.
And I was very satisfied with Rise of Skywalker. But I think when I turned my story brain on and such, I'm like, ooh, it could have been so much more. Because, again, since we're getting into it, I, like the idea of Rey not being connected to anyone. I was hoping that what Kylo said in Last Jedi was true.
Yeah.
Because that's a nice message. And that seems on brand. It's not about who came before you. They changed the theme in a good way, to not fear who you are and that sort of thing. So they made it work. But that's just my take on it.
No, very true. Speaking of Rey and how you talked about, the connectivity between these sequel movies, one thing that really bothered me, and not just so I can diss on the movie, guys, but because Rey is my favorite character of the sequel trilogy.
Uh-huh.
And once I saw her in The Force Awakens, I was immediately attached, and Force Awakens was unbelievable at the time. And one thing I noticed as this trilogy continued is that we lost more and more of Rey. The Last Jedi was, I say, kind of Luke's story, and then she was almost kind of like a background character, trying to help get this new person as the main character, which is Luke. And then my girlfriend pointed out to me that in The Rise of Skywalker, it was kind of even less of Rey's story, in the fact that it focused more on Kylo Ren / Ben Solo. And
right.
So that was probably my biggest concern, is just that, we started off with a really strong character in Rey, and mystery box stuff aside, lineage aside, I think the focus should have stayed on her a little bit more, because I think she was a really, really strong character, and she could have had a very, very interesting story to tell. And that was the biggest connectivity thing for me with those movies.
Yeah.
Who's your favorite in the sequel trilogy? Favorite character?
Kylo Ren, and then second would be Rey. Because I'm with you. As soon as I saw in Force Awakens, Rey, eating her lunch with an old X-wing helmet on in an abandoned AT-AT, I was like, oh, I love this character, But then Kylo, I thought, was great because, unlike Darth Vader, who they waited a couple movies to kind of show or allude that he had a good side to him, Kylo from the front was a conflicted character. So I'm not saying I like Kylo more than Darth Vader. I'm just saying in the sequel trilogy,
right.
Kylo was definitely the one. And, I grown attached to him doing all those little Calvin and Hobbes cartoons with him. So I'm very grateful for that character.
Well, let's talk about little Kylo. He seems to be very popular with everybody. I know he is for me. For those of you listening, Brian does a lot of Star Wars art, and one that I've seen come up a lot is this little Kylo, which a lot of you have probably seen before. Do you want to talk a little bit about him and all your Star Wars drawings?
Yeah. So just like you, when I came out of Force Awakens, I loved it. I was so energized by the fact, because there was a lot riding on it, like, oh, please be good, please be good.
Right.
And I thought not only was it good, it was great. And like really, like I was into it. And when Rey sleds down that hill on the dunes, and she is there, it reminded me, it flashed in my head the image of Calvin and Hobbes riding in their red wagon. So when I got home from the movie, I'm like, oh, I got to draw something. And so I just drew that. I drew Rey and BB-8 in the style of Calvin and Hobbes sliding down this sand dune. And again, right place, right time. It just started getting shared and liked. And I noticed more and more correlation between those comics and the movies. But it wasn't until I figured out, oh, Calvin's a really difficult child. It must be hard to be his parents. And then I thought of Kylo Ren, and like, oh, well, he's like the problem child of the galaxy. And he's got two parents that everyone knows, Han and Leia. There might be something to that. So I started really basically redrawing classic Calvin and Hobbes cartoons and just changing the characters and keeping the dialogue exactly the same. And because people are so familiar with those strips, they got that on both levels. And there was one specifically that I had done, which wasn't based on an actual strip, but inspired by, and Kylo had massacred a bunch of snowmen on his front lawn. And Han just looks to Leia really dryly and says, he gets this from your side of the family. And that one like really took off. And I ended up getting 60,000 followers in 1 week.
Wow. That's impressive.
Yeah, after that image.
One of my favorite of the little Kylo is he's talking to Boba Fett. Boba Fett has a little ice cream stand of the Han Solo, and he's like, he's no good to me melted. Yeah. So then it became, thank you, then it became like just my years and years of useless Star Wars knowledge and quotes, and like, oh, I could put my own twist on this. So it kind of like moved away from Calvin and Hobbes strips and just became like little one-panel comics of little Kylo having fun in the galaxy of Star Wars. They're so cute.
Thanks.
They're unbelievably adorable.
It's fun when you play with proportions.
There were some other ones of Star Wars that you did. For those of you listening, Brian, my boss had a piece of art commissioned for me for one of my birthdays by Brian, and it was of Iron Man and Luke Skywalker navigating through the Death Star. And that one had something interesting to the way it was drawn. In addition, there's another one I think of with a similar style, and it was where Finn is behind a rock, and there's like a what are they called? A Nard?
Oh, the Rathtar?
Rathtar, yes, coming up from above him. And one thing I really love about those two in particular is the layering that you have going on in there. There's like a square or a rectangle of just space. Mm-hmm. And then the characters go outside of that layer, and you kind of mess with the positive and negative spaces of the frame, creating this 3D image. I think that goes into a little bit of your style too. Is that intentional when you draw it out?
Yeah, definitely. Thank you. I'm a big fan of like European comics, French comics, and comic art, I should say, not stand-up. I mean, I'm sure they're funny too, but French comic art. And they play a lot with the frame and this idea of, really kind of drawing what's necessary and then suggesting what's in the background, as opposed to doing a fully rendered drawing, which, you know, can look beautiful, but sometimes take away from the main idea. You know, right now, what I'm working on as we speak is a commission for someone for a tattoo, and they wanted a Princess Leia and Snoopy mashup, and they also mentioned that they really loved Up, and if I could get somehow something of Up into that piece. So what I ended up was having little Leia hugging Snoopy, and then Snoopy's got the little bandolier that Chewie wears around him. But then I'm like, oh, Up. What can I do with Up? Well, Up is a house with balloons. Snoopy has a dog house. Well, I'll put them on a dog house being lifted by a balloon. So, like,
oh, it's so cool.
That idea on itself doesn't need a background, right?
Yeah.
Regardless if it was for a tattoo or not. It's a clear graphic image, and really that's what drawing is the arrangement of shapes. And so it's kind of reducing it down to the most basic of levels so that the idea comes across.
Yeah. Well, you guys heard it here first. A little sneak peek of his latest commission.
Yeah, that's right. That's right.
You do a lot of mashups. How did that start? Was it by commission, or did you just start it on your own?
I just started doing it on my own because it's fun. There are little ideas that pop in my head that seem like, oh, this would be fun to draw. And I think that's important, is that I do it because it is fun for me. And I think that energy comes across in the piece. Whereas if I was doing it just for likes or just to get followers, it might not feel as genuine. You know, because I really only play in the sandboxes that I know. I know Star Wars, I know Marvel. You won't often see me doing a lot of DC mashups because I don't really know those characters and that sort of thing. So I think it comes down to just what I like to play with, and people seem to enjoy that.
Is it difficult to adapt? Say you got two characters from two different movies or TV shows, etc., and you want to bring them into one story. Is it difficult to adapt the different styles into one style?
No, because a lot of times they want it just in that Calvin and Hobbes style, or they want it in my style. So it's more just about unifying the characters. The hardest one I ever got was someone wanted a mashup of Dumbo and Batgirl. And
that does sound hard.
I'm like, how am I going to connect those two? But then I realized, Dumbo is holding that black feather. The black feather, makes him think he can fly. So what if that black feather was actually a black batarang, and Batgirl was swinging through Gotham? And then you also had the circus element, right, of Dumbo Circus, but then also the Graysons Circus. So I was able to make it work, but it took a little longer.
That's the circus that Robin is from, is that right?
That's right, yeah.
Okay.
Robin's family, yeah.
That's really cool. Have you seen any or watched any Star Wars of the animated series or movie?
Yes. Yeah, I watched, not completely, but I watched a lot of the Clone Wars, and I watched a lot of Rebels. I'm starting to watch Resistance now.
I just finished watching Resistance.
Oh, yeah?
I actually really loved it. It was so fun, and it's very, very kiddie, but anyone listening just want more awesome Star Wars, it's amazing how it feels so Star Wars without having to rely on the Force or the Jedi or stuff like that. And
it's great. I'm really enjoying it as well.
I'm not gonna spoil it for you, but the ending had me in tears. It was so sweet.
Wow, that's cool. That's awesome.
And the other one, have you seen any of Rebels?
Yes, I started watching Rebels. Actually, I think I followed that one pretty closely, although I don't retain a lot of it. But yeah, I liked Rebels a lot. I especially liked where it took Ahsoka.
Oh, yes. Rebels is actually my favorite of the animated stuff. I was so attached to that one.
Yeah.
Before we wrap up, I just want to know a little bit more about your relationship with Lucasfilm and what you're doing in the future, and I guess also you can talk a little bit about the relationship with Marvel too.
Uh-huh. Yeah, Lucasfilm, it's been pretty amazing. Um, I've been illustrating a series of books for them. And they are like a throwback to the old 1980s droids cartoon. It's C-3PO, R2-D2, and BB-8. And they're like young readers. They're like Dr. Seuss books, but Star Wars. And so those have been really fun to illustrate. I'm working with a great writer named Caitlin Kennedy, who is amazing. And so 2 of those books are out. We're hoping to do a third, but I think that's somewhat dependent on sales. So if you all want to go out there and buy R2-D2 is Lost on Amazon, you will help the cause to get a third one made. So that'll be my little plug.
It's on Kindle as well, is that right?
Yes, that's right. It's really fun. They when the movies come out on home video, they'll usually have me do official little Kylo comics for them, which is really fun. So it's been a great partnership born out of fan art, which is pretty cool.
Now, you said you work with a writer, Caitlin Kennedy. Do you incorporate any ideas to the story as well? Do you guys write together at all?
No, it's very much a writer-illustrator position on those books. Oh, okay. So she writes the script, and then I will illustrate it. But it's kind of cool because she trusts me as I trust her with the story. So she won't go into like too much detail about like how it should be laid out or drawn. She tells the story, and then I'm able to visually support that.
Oh, that's a really nice relationship. That's really good.
Yeah.
Any last minute thoughts on Star Wars as far as where you see it going in the future, in both television, movies, and where do you think this Star Wars is going?
I think Mandalorian and Rogue One hit a sweet spot.
Oh yeah.
I think the 2 of those properties are a great place for future filmmakers to play in. I really enjoyed The Mandalorian. You could tell it was a passion project, right?
Yeah.
And Rogue One, I really enjoyed because it fleshed out the world and connected the movie, connected to the original trilogy. More of that, please.
I'm right there with you. I love The Mandalorian. It's going someplace really special. I can't wait.
Yeah.
Well, awesome. That's it for today. Thank you so much for coming on and talking with us and talking about Star Wars. Before we say goodbye, tell everyone where they can find you, your social media, anything else you want to, promote out there or plug. Go ahead and let everybody know.
Yeah, thank you. So you can find me pretty much on any social media platform. And my account's usually at Brian Kesinger. I'm most active on Instagram, so you'll find most up-to-date stuff there. And then I have a website and web store at briankesinger.com, and that's Kesinger with 1 S. And you will find, places, events that I'll be at. Obviously, none this year. Then you'll see my store where you can get prints and books and commissions.
Wow, that was absolutely incredible. That was the interview I did with Brian Kesinger, and it was such an honor, such a privilege. I'm very happy that we got the chance to do that, and hopefully we'll get to do it again sometime very soon. Thank you all again for tuning in and listening. If you're new to the channel, please make sure to subscribe or tune in or get notifications if you're on YouTube so you can get an update next time we drop an episode. Next week, I'm joined by Zach Valadon, an old friend of mine, where we're talking about what does it mean to be a Jedi. We'll also be celebrating the 40th year anniversary of The Empire Strikes Back. That's right, it's been around for 40 years. It's pretty crazy. But thank you guys again, and now, somehow, someway, somewhere this week, May the Force be with you.